You're listening to the Breakthrough Investor in Commercial Real Estate Podcast. Brought to you by MVP Equity Group, where we learn from private equity experts, their mindset, and ways to achieve financial independence. Whether you're new to investing or a seasoned investor in the industry who needs new ideas for investing in multifamily, self-storage facilities, retail development, mixed use, or hotels, you're in the right place. We will share our own real-world experiences so you know exactly what it takes to be highly successful at investing passively or actively in commercial real estate opportunities. We'll uncover some tools, tips, and techniques to help you stand out in this highly competitive field. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. And if you want to learn more, visit us at mvpequitygroup.com. Here to challenge you to think outside the box is your host, Ernest Peralta.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Breakthrough Investor in Commercial Real Estate. I'm your host, Ernest Peralta, and today's guest, it's been a long time coming. I've been wanting to get this gentleman on the show for some time, and we finally got him. His name is Logan Freeman. Welcome to the show, Logan.
Thank you, Ernest, for having me. I'm excited to dive into some of these topics you've got for us today. I'm really excited about this. So thank you for having me on.
Oh, likewise. And again, I'm excited as well, just because of the topics and some of the similarities of our background in general. Yeah. So just a quick brief background on Logan, if you will. He's a commercial real estate investor, a developer, a commercial real estate broker. In his past life, he played collegiate football and also had an opportunity to play professionally in the NFL as well. He currently resides out in Kansas City, Missouri. He lives, out there. He's been out there for some time. And with that said, Logan, can you fill us in on the gap, I guess, in between of how did you get started in multifamily investing and where you are today?
Yeah, it all started back when I got cut from the NFL, Ernest, and we've talked a little bit about this, but at the end of the day, to make a very long story kind of short, is there was an identity crisis, right? Whenever you have identified as one kind of thing, in my case, it was an athlete my whole life. And when that's taken away from you, either forcefully or your own decision, you have to kind of go through this process of creating what this new identity for yourself is. And, frankly, I just didn't know at that point. And so, I have some good mentors in my life, but when I was cut from the NFL, I decided to go back and finish my master's degree. I have an undergrad in hotel and restaurant management, and about 3 or 4 years in, or 3.5 years in, I knew that's not what I wanted to do. So I needed to get that master's degree. And so when I went back to school, I don't tell this story a whole lot, but you don't, you're not on a scholarship anymore. And as an undrafted free agent, you're not making the big bucks if you don't make it to the actual roster, and so I had to get a job, I had to get a job, and I moved into a 2-bedroom roach infested apartment with no front door in Warrensburg, Missouri, and took a job driving an hour to work and making 265 cold calls a day, then driving back and then going to school 4 hours in the evening. And I'd spend 12 hours in the library on Saturdays catching back up. And, through that process, I, turned my car into the classroom on wheels. And, frankly, that's where you see all these books behind me. Well, that's about half the books I've read. The other ones are through Audible and podcasts and different programs, Tony Robbins, Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar, just the Brian Tracy's of the world, the godfathers of this whole, piece, Napoleon Hill, Dale Carnegie, all of those guys. And, so I was an offensive lineman. I lost 100 pounds during the 6 months. I really, figured out that I needed some business experience, and cold calling wasn't necessarily, what I wanted to do, but I figured that was where you would get paid for your performance. And it was a great experience for me. And so I learned a lot about myself during that transition of becoming, going from an athlete to, the next phase in my life. And, frankly, I'd been reading these books, and I picked up a book that was Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I'm sure a lot of other folks here that are listening to this show have read that. And then I got turned on to that whole, genre. And so I started really reading the commercial real estate and real estate books. And when I moved to Kansas City after I finished my master's program is when I, bought my first house. And I said, I'm going to buy this house, I'm going to fix it up, and then I'm going to sell it. And in 2 years I did that, and, made more money on that sale of that house than I did my whole salary for that year. And I mean, that's when the light bulb kind of clicked for me. I had a couple other jobs in Kansas City, but then ultimately about 4.5 years ago, I was fired. And this was another big decision point in my life, or kind of an inflection point. I would say that I had to make a decision. And I have a very supportive wife who said, you go and chase your passion and your entrepreneurial vision, and I'll continue to work and support the family. And, that was a blessing. I mean, it was an incredible blessing that she bestowed upon myself and our family. And that's when I got into real estate. I took a head of acquisitions job with a $50 million fund here in Kansas City. And this is just happenstance. One of my buddies was building a company and landed this fund as their main client, and their acquisitions guy left. And so it was just perfect timing. So I stepped in and I completed over 130 transactions my first year, all single family homes and smaller multifamily. But when I sat down and completed this fund, we did a complete portfolio refinance over those 265 doors that they had, returned about 85% of the capital to those investors, and it was still cash flowing. And I was just curious, with these sponsors, where did this money come from? And that's when the word syndication kind of came to fruition. And I had not heard that word before. And so what did I do? I went and picked up the books. I started studying, learning, went to a bunch of conferences and seminars. And I said, this is what I want to do. Well, I took that idea to the broker I was working with at the time. He said, no way. You're going to get crushed. You're going to be playing with the big boys. And I'm not interested in doing that. And so I left there, moved my license to a commercial and multifamily brokerage, and started to purchase some assets myself, put some joint ventures together. I did that for about 2 years, got the transactional knowledge that I needed, build the relationships here in Kansas City that I needed, and then found my partners that are, in the business that I'm in today. And, that was 2 years ago. And I think we're right around 1,100 units and got a couple more projects coming over the finish line here. So that's kind of the transition from athlete to commercial real estate. I know there's a lot there, so I'll just pause.
That is amazing. And thank you for summarizing that, by the way. That was very succinct. When we were getting on the conversation here offline, one of the things that I did mention to you was the fact that after our initial conversation, you just had so much, you have this perseverance, about you. And I think that kind of stems from having that athletic background, always pushing yourself to your limit. But it's amazing to hear how you had no inclination really of forethought about commercial real estate or investing while you were playing professional football. Yeah. It just was happenstance, apparently. It was because of your circumstances that dictated you to think about what other paths or opportunities there was for you. But one thing that I found here pretty amazing is the fact that you were able to look at, one, investing in single family homes, getting into commercial brokerage. Within a 2-year time frame, you were able to get into syndication, which isn't an easy field to get into, by the way. Right. One of the things that I wanted to ask you is, along this journey, did you pick mentors, or was this just through theoretical buying books, looking at podcasts, going through YouTube? What was your process there, and how did you actually start to land your very first syndication deal?
Absolutely. Great question. And it's a little bit of both. So it's a little bit of, and I always say that books, podcasts, and programs are always complete at the theoretical level, but it's very difficult to be applied and be effective at the applied level. And so, I took the books, the knowledge, the thirst for that knowledge, and then I went and found people who were doing it in my market, right? And then I figured out what problem they had in their business, and I just asked, can I try to solve this for you? And one thing that I've learned in this business is if you can control capital and deal flow, you will never be, hungry for, your next deal. Because if you have those two things, or a choke point is what I like to call on those two things, you're going to have a good business. And so I knew that I wasn't going to be the operational guy. I knew that I had no interest in being, on that side of the business. So I went and found some people who'd been doing this business for 15, 17 years and said, hey, let me go hunt some projects. Let me go, find some capital. Those are two things that, not a lot of people, love to do. And even if they do love to do it, they're not very good at it typically. And so I tried to figure out, okay, systematically, how can I approach this that says, how can I break this down and actually make this a repeatable process? And so then I started to figure out, okay, I need to be talking to these people. I need to be networking with these folks. I need to be reading these books. I need to know this language. I need to understand underwriting. I need to understand the legal side of this, the tax ramifications. And so I started studying that as well. But I was able to leverage other people's kind of track record and then ask them what problem they had in their business to go solve it. And then I brought that to the table and I got learning experiences. I got at bats, right? And so that's what led me to my first project. And I'm happy to talk about those first projects, but I kind of wanted to pause there just for a second and kind of make sure that I reiterate the fact that yes, knowledge is important, but if you don't have any experience, you got to go find that. You got to be willing to give it up, give some of the deal up to kind of get into some projects so you can get a few under your belt as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You hit on some very key points there. One was basically you didn't just throw yourself out in the open, considering you were just gaining some experience here in the industry. And a lot of us, even myself, I've caught myself too when I started getting into commercial real estate, is just finding groups or finding individuals that either are experienced or have some knowledge of syndication, and then just saying, hey, where can I help? I think you took the approach of what problems can I solve? And you brought that to the table and tried to see what kind of opportunities you could present by not, I guess, trying to tell people that, hey, I'm here, use me. Came in with more of, here's what I can do. You probably went to look at some listings like I think you did. You did some due diligence and brought this back to the team for some things to actually look at. So I think one highlight there, a couple highlights, is the fact that you were an action taker. You went and actually found and looked at properties, brought this to a team of individuals and have them look at what you brought to the table. You probably did some underwriting, understood underwriting as well. How long did it take you to understand underwriting? Because that's a process in itself to understand.
Yeah, it took me quite a while. And, frankly, that's why I got all the transactions under my belt before I even bought my first deal. I had 150 transactions under my belt between single family homes, small multifamily deals, and triple net lease projects, shopping centers here in Kansas City before I ever did my first project. And I think that's extremely important because I understand the transaction process from the beginning to the end, and not only the underwriting piece, but dealing with appraisals, dealing with the financing side of things, understanding the title, understanding the legal of all these things and getting them over the finish line. So I was able to, leverage that experience into my first couple transactions, which I could kind of zoom into the end goal, which is closing the transaction, and then step back and say, what roadblocks have I seen on these 150 transactions that I have done that I can avoid in my own transaction? So I was 3 steps ahead in these transactions, which gave our investors more confidence because we had all of that experience going through most of those transactions. And so I always try to put myself in the shoes of the investor, but then also I do a process of fear setting, which basically says, if everything could go wrong, what are those things and what are my contingencies for that? And so I think that that's the biggest piece of what allowed me to feel confident and then go take action. And one thing I want to point out was, when I found those partners, it's not like we had struck a deal on paper and written anything down. I asked them, what problems could I solve? I said, okay, thank you. You keep doing you. And then I went out and I said, I'll be back in touch in 30 days. And I went out and then found projects and brought them back and said, hey, here's what I think. And then I repitched. I didn't ask for the opportunity. I just did it. And I did that enough to find the partners that I'm doing business with now and the partners that I did my first projects with as well.
Wow. That's amazing. Did you find books to help you on providing a pitch, to these investors? Or was this something that you just thought out of the blue and say, hey, through my, analytical thinking, this is what I think the next steps are? How did you go about that process?
Well, the pitching of the deal, I have to give a lot of credit to Oren Clough early on. Pitch Anything, Flip the Script. He has those 2 books out from a psychological standpoint, right? I don't agree with everything that he says, but he's a very, big personality because of his business that he's in, right? But I did really like the fact that he broke it down from a psychological standpoint. Don't know if any of his research is true or not, but, it got me in the right frame of mind. So that was that part. But then also, guys like Richard C. Wilson with the Family Office Club, guys like Hunter Thompson with Cash Flow Connections podcast, guys like Joe Fairless, Michael Blanc is who taught me how to underwrite projects from at least the beginning phase of my career as well. And so I took all of that and I said, okay, how can I model all of these, but also create my own unique, perspective and voice in the industry. And then once I had that, I said, okay, I'm armed. Let me go see if I can go raise some capital. And what I learned really quickly was, the investors who actively buy real estate are not passive investors. And so I had to reframe this in my own mind. Donald Miller's book, Story Brand, helped me understand the brand script that I needed to be touching on and the story that I needed to be telling and the right avatar to be talking to, because active investors are much different than passive investors, and passive investors are much different than active investors. And so I had to go find a whole new kind of investor base after I created this avatar through these books that I was reading, and then start building connections. And what I will say is, I spent 4 years now, I've spent on the phone, in front of the camera, connecting with people on LinkedIn, posting 5 times a day, just to get a network to the point of where we can actually do projects. And so I've iterated every single year, obviously, and I have folks that help me, pitch projects and look at more complex transactions now. But at the beginning, man, it was a lot of grinding. I just kind of stuck back to my went back to my 265 cold calls a day and say, who can I get on the phone? My calendar's got some white space. Great. I got 55 people I can call and just connect with. Let me see if I can pitch them a deal and build a relationship with them. And that's what I did. I spent a lot of time on the phones, a lot of times trying to build relationships with people and then knocking on doors. I think that's one thing that a lot of people are afraid of in this industry is, if you're just getting started, you got to be willing to put yourself out there. And it's not easy, because you will fail. You will sound silly, stupid at some points. But guess what? If you use that feedback, if you use failure as a feedback and you can learn from it, you can get better. But you have to be willing to put yourself out there. And I frankly think that's where a lot of people get stuck in this paralysis by analysis is they're thinking they have to have all of the answers, figured out. You need to be thinking about those questions that the people are going to ask, but you're not going to have everything figured out. I don't have everything figured out. I'm still battling challenges on a regular basis, but I'm willing to put myself out there, put myself around the right people, and continue to ask questions and put things in front of other folks, and then take that feedback and get better. And I think that if you can get past that fear, which is just false emotions appearing real, then you'll allow yourself to be vulnerable, honest, authentic, and your self-confidence, your self-efficacy, does not come from other people's perspectives or opinions about you. It has to come from within. And that's the truest thing that I can say in this business.
Mm-hmm. Very well. Very good. There's one individual there, Pitch Anything. That's what came to mind, Oren Klaff. And I actually have his book too, as well, here on my shelf. So Great. Yeah, very good book. Do you think, and I'm just looking at your background, just listening to what you're saying is making yourself, vulnerable, not really vulnerable, but putting yourself out there, making these cold calls. Do you think having your background as a commercial real estate broker helps you in the investing arena as well? Or do you think that's just through perseverance and something that you think that you need to just develop as a person?
Well, I think that good brokers solve problems. They manufacture opportunity out of thin air. And if you are a problem solver, if you're a consultant, you just have the title of a broker, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there's salespeople in this industry and there's true brokers. Brokers are the ones that are typically, solving problems, have relationships, know of the deal flow, and can get people across the finish line. And so they're really just problem solvers and the relationship-based type of guys and gals. The best ones are anyways. I think the experience that I had with the fund, with the 150 transactions, absolutely gave, other people the confidence to say, this guy's not going to do a bad deal, or at least, it's not going to be a deal that everybody else has seen, beforehand. And if he's done that many transactions in that market, he probably knows at least something, to be correct in that market. So I think that, understanding it from a broker standpoint is important, but really, truly, all we are is problem solvers. And I think that you have to be able to stay very consistent emotionally through this business, because if you don't, and you get in the highs and you get in the lows, you're going to burn out, you're going to fizzle out, and other people are going to see that. It's truly when the challenges and when the rubber meets the road is when, folks really start to trust you. And that's where I think I am at now is giving people trust. And even if it's bad news, I'm telling you right now, I've got a 12:15 call that is not good news that I have to deliver. And, frankly, it's not easy to do. But at the end of the day, you have to understand that not all news is going to be good news. But if you have bad news to deliver, you need a plan. And you say, okay, this is our next best option to go through. And, studying the great minds of investors like Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett, Howard Marks, Ray Dalio, those four guys, Sam Zell, those five guys have really been instrumental in how I have decided to go about thinking about mental models, which will allow me to make better decisions and communicate those to other people. And at the end of the day, trust is built upon relationships that believe that you can solve that problem and you've been there before and you have a plan. If you don't, then that trust is going to be lost. And if you're trying to hide something or not clearly communicate it or all of the facts is whenever things are going to catch back up with you and you're going to get put in a tight spot.
When you get to a point where you're starting to build trust, that's when you actually have investors now that actually have seen you probably through, some of your investments that you've been able to put together. One thing I wanted to ask you is, I'm assuming you have a team of folks now. You've got a equity firm with a few folks that work with you. If you don't mind, how big is your firm and how many folks actually work for you?
Yeah, we have grown to 11 people at FTW Investments now, and we have 3 principals of that business. The rest are folks that are on either the operations side, acquisition side, accounting side, admin side, and marketing. But we are up to 11, which is crazy to say because last year at this time, I think we had 4. And so, that growth has been instrumental in our ability to continue to deliver consistent results and be able to handle the amount of transactions that we have done in the past 12 to 15 months.
That's very well. And also, what the roles that you play, do you play, different roles within your organization? Do you have a specific area that you like to focus in?
Yeah, my role is typically, raising the capital for our projects. So the equity side of the business, which is an important one to understand, and it's a relationship business. But secondly is the marketing side. So you'll see me do a lot of podcasts like this, a lot of videos, a lot of LinkedIn and social media posts, webinars, that type of stuff. So I kind of do the capital raising marketing side, and then I'm hunting for deals all of the time. So I'm highly involved in our off-market acquisition strategy, something that we have been really focused on building up in that pipeline. And so I'm on the acquisitions, marketing, and capital raising side of our business.
Oh, very good. Yeah, and those are the ones that a lot of people try to get into. And like you said earlier, a lot of people are good at that. It does take practice and time, but it's good that you actually, it seems like you're the face. I've seen you, I follow you on social media and I've seen a lot of your marketing, very professional, by the way. And I think that you really have a certain way of communicating, which I can see why now that you're having potential customers and clients trusting you is because of the fact of the information that you provide to the people. So
absolutely. Education in this business is extremely important. There's over 13 I think it's 13 million accredited investor households in the United States alone. And so there's a lot of folks out there that are not privy to these types of investments. The Jobs Act of 2012 really opened the door for folks like you and myself to start put these projects together and utilize digital marketing and social media for those aspects of their business. Pre 2012 and the Jobs Act from the Obama administration, it was you had to know the guy or the gal putting the project together. And, frankly, it's just not that way anymore. And so now we have this whole educational wave of, industry in this. I mean, there's a whole industry just in the education side of commercial real estate investing. And so you have a lot of new entrants into the marketplace. What you don't have is a lot of true operators like ourselves, kind of operating in the space. You'll see a lot of folks on the marketing, on the capital raising side, but less folks in the operational side, asset management side, which truly is the business that we are in. And I always mention to folks that there's a difference between being a real estate investor and being in the business of real estate investing. And I think that's a very important line to understand and to draw. And when you are in the business of real estate investing, you're in the business of actually implementing business plans, solving problems and doing the value add, whether that be an operational efficiency on the project, whether that be some sort of cosmetic upgrade through construction, whether that be a rebranding, whether that be, digital marketing in regards to leasing. I mean, there's a lot of different things that have to come into fruition with this. And then alongside that, there's probably 4 or 5 different tech, stacks now that we have in every single vertical of this business. And so, I frankly think that there's a big difference between, capital raising, syndicating, and actually doing the operations of the deal and working with the vendors, working with the tenants and the residents and the property managers and the attorneys and the title and the sellers. And so, what we've tried to do is say, hey, we're building a firm that is going to be full, cycle, take a deal full cycle, and we're handling all of that stuff in-house. And I think that investors enjoy that, because if you have control along every single one of those aspects, then you're the one that can make the decision that can really either impact it positively or negatively. And frankly, that's a lot of responsibility. But our investors have found that to be extremely beneficial, because we can make the decisions that we need to, and we trust ourselves, our team, to do that instead of having to try to rely on somebody else.
Very good. So one question I wanted to ask you: you've been in this game, you've been in real estate now for a little over 2 years, right?
It's almost 5 years now.
Or 5 years. Excuse me.
Yep.
My fault. So almost 5 years now, being in the industry that long. How many assets do you guys have under management? And are you guys mainly in Kansas City, or are you guys across the United States?
So we are just about ready to eclipse the $100 million of assets under management, which equates to about 1,100 doors. We also have a few different alternative assets. We have a couple hotels here in Kansas City. We have 2 office buildings. We have a small portfolio of single family homes, and we have a couple of neighborhood retail shopping centers as well. But the bulk of our portfolio is in workforce housing. And so we have about 1,100 units of that here in Kansas City. We are doing our first project right now outside of Kansas City, and this is in the Lincoln, Nebraska market. So we really like Nebraska, the Quad Cities of Iowa, some certain cities in Oklahoma, Northwest Arkansas, and then the eastern side of Missouri, which is St. Louis. We're starting to look at a lot of different projects in there as well, but still very highly focused on the Midwest.
Oh, very good. Wow, you definitely have a diversified portfolio. By the way, you've got hotels in there as well. That's pretty good. Do you guys have any other types of assets there, such as self-storage, or that's just not part of your business plan?
Well, I think we are probably the one group in the Midwest who have done more work on self-storage projects and do not own one up to this point. What I'll say with self-storage is, it is it's a commodity in a stance. And so you really have to understand the supply and demand, drivers of the self-storage industry. We have not done any of those projects. We have looked at hundreds of self-storage projects, but just have not really pulled the trigger on one yet. The other asset classes that we're very familiar with is office and neighborhood retail shopping centers. And I actually really like neighborhood retail shopping centers. And I think we'll continue to look for those projects. But the pricing arbitrage that I thought was going to happen the last 12, 15, 18 months now has not. And so, frankly, we have not seen the benefits of going into those asset classes. But, we bought an office building, about a 40,000 square foot office building, that we needed to, have space for ourselves. And so we did a lease to purchase option on that building. We were able to lease it up during our option and then exercise that about 2 weeks ago. And so we purchased that 40,000 square foot office building here in Kansas City.
Very good. Wow. That's amazing. You guys accomplished a lot in 5 years, and you guys are also very inclined, or you seem like you have some knowledge in other asset classes as well, which is pretty good, pretty interesting. So let me ask you this question. So I know, prior to this call, some people know me also in a prior life that I used to be a CFL, which is a Canadian Football League sports agent. And that was another thing that you and I had in common, outside of being a multifamily investor as well. And, one of the things that I wanted to ask you is, being a professional athlete yourself, what advice can you give to folks that, are maybe reaching the tail end of their career, or
Sure.
folks that maybe are starting to look at, okay, what can I look at after, my athletic career? What advice can you give somebody in that realm?
I would say get your money, get your knowledge, and get your experience working for you when you're sleeping. And what I mean by that, if you're an athlete, if you are a high income producer, it's great, but at the end of the day, you are paid for the time that you have available to be paid for. And so you have to be thinking about the next transition. And I have a lot of friends that are still either professional athletes or are transitioning out of that. I see them go into the insurance world, into, the commercial real estate world. And I think that's great. But I would say if you have a decent amount of capital kind of there, figure out what you can do to get those dollars working for you. And then in something you enjoy, right? I mean, maybe that's real estate. Maybe it's cryptocurrency, maybe it's oil and gas, maybe it's something else. I don't know, but find something that's interesting to you that can help build wealth for you now. So you start educating yourself when that transition does happen, you can actually start being a practitioner. And if you do have that sort of experience as an athlete, especially on the professional side, people are going to be gravitated towards you. And so use that to your advantage while you have that brand. And so I think that's the other thing to say is, use that brand. If you are at the highest level of whatever, industry you are in, use that brand and leverage that into the next transition. Because, if it's something you're getting paid for with your body, our bodies are going to give out at some point. There's always going to be a stronger, faster, younger person that is trying to take your spot, right? I mean, and so at the end of the day, you need to be able to leverage that brand and use that to your advantage. And I think the way that you do that is you start building an identity outside of your athletic career. And one thing I'm really grateful for was, early on, I started picking up reading. I started picking up writing, a blog. I started picking up these different personal and professional development kind of mentalities or modalities, I will say. And I started to leverage what I learned in my athletic career into the business world. And I think that was an appealing message to a lot of people, not just the transition, but the ability to say, okay, I'm no longer an athlete. I have to use my mind and not necessarily my body to make money. I think a lot of people can resonate with that. And so that hit a lot of, people in the right spot, I think. And that allowed me to say, look, I have an interesting background. Everybody has an interesting background. Learn your story, learn how you can have that story relate to others, and use your brand, use your presence right now that you're creating for your next transition. And I think that everybody needs to be thinking about that, Ernest.
That's amazing. You hit some really good key points. That was very, very well said, by the way. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
You mentioned branding. One thing I did before I left our firm was we started to implement how to market and brand the athlete. And that was one section of our business that we wanted to help, the athletes. And so I just want to build on top of what you said, and for all the athletes out there too, utilize that brand that Logan just said, because you've already got a following. You've already developed that, which
Absolutely.
is hard to do for a lot of people. I don't come from, a background where I have a strong following when I got into commercial real estate. So if you do have that following already, utilize that platform, like Logan said, build that to your specification of what niche you want to get into as your next, transition to your career, because that actually will help you actually catapult you at least, 2 to maybe even 5 times what an average person that's trying to get into, the industry and having a social media following, because it takes time to build that and that brand. So good.
Yeah,
there, very good point.
I think a good example is, I forget his name. It's either J.K. Richards or something. He's the guy who, in the NBA finals, forgot about the shot clock and, passed the ball. I think he was on the Golden State Warriors, maybe. I can't remember his name, but I just saw something that ESPN put out. He's not playing basketball anymore. He's actually going back to school at Texas A&M, and he joined the collegiate golf team, and so how cool is that? So he started to, put stuff up on his social media, I'm sure, about golfing and different things like that. And this is what I'm transitioning into. So he can take those followers that liked him while he was playing basketball into his next, his next iteration of his life. And if you are an athlete, if you do have a great brand right now, start peppering in every once in a while something about what you're doing on the investing side, on the business side, something that interests you other than just when you're on the field, on the court, playing golf, whatever it is. Bring that into your identity right now. And so whenever that transition does happen, your followers are already tuned into that. It's one thing to transition over time, and it's one thing to say, okay, I'm done, and now I have to do the next thing. And so you might lose some followers that way, but if you start to transition and you start to prep them for that transition, they'll still follow you and kind of go with you wherever you go.
Exactly. Your true followers will follow you regardless.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. So those are your hardcore people that will follow you because they want you, they love you as a brand, and they will support you. So just couple more questions here for you, Logan. I can't believe how time is flying here. I got so many different questions I want to ask you, but what is one common myth about being a real estate investor or broker that you would like to debunk?
Well, I think that the easiest one for me is, that you can do it all alone. And for me, I think that a myth that, you have a hard charging person, usually a personality that, can get things done, that type of stuff, a leader, so to speak, in that regard. When you go into the business world, especially in the commercial real estate investing world, brokerage world, it's a team business, and you can really get bogged down really quickly unless you have the support that you need. And that's kind of, one of the other questions that I know we wanted to talk about was what is one of your biggest failures in this industry? And it's just that. It's trying to do everything myself and then figuring out when I'm trying to do everything, I'm not doing anything very well. And so instead of being a generalist, I've kind of positioned myself as a very specific person. And so I'm not a very, very good guy to be a jack of all trades. What I like to do is go much more deep and much less wide. And so for me, putting the people around me that can allow me to operate in my sweet spot, or what the mental model that the Japanese have created called the ikigai, or the meaning for life, the greatest intersection of your strength and your passion, is where you should try to operate on. And that's what I try to implement in my life on a regular basis, is find that sweet spot, overlay that sweet spot into the business that you're working on, and stay there, and then build around yourself. Just like a team in athletics, right? You got a quarterback. Well, they need support from their offensive line. They need wide receivers to throw the ball. They need a running back to hand it off to, right? I mean, they can't score a touchdown themselves typically, if they don't have any help. If you're Patrick Mahomes, that's maybe a different story. But at the end of the day, you need a team around you. And so, the biggest myth is that you can do everything yourself. You can do a certain amount by yourself, but if you put the right people around you and you have a team, you can go farther, faster together. And that's what I've tried to implement in our business. And probably the biggest failure of my commercial real estate career was trying to do everything myself.
Mm-hmm. Very well. Yeah, that's another great point. Is focus is key, and you don't want to be bombarded with being a jack of all trades, because I get caught up in that thinking, oh, if I do multiple things, then one of these has got to hit. That's one mentality. But if you focus really on one area of your business or just one aspect of something that you're interested in, eventually over time, you're going to be much more successful, or even though it might take longer, than what you might expect, but your outcome will be a lot more because you're putting so much effort in that area. And,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One thing that I read in your bio, and I think this just resonates with you as a person, and I read this, it's in order to have what you really want, you must first be who you really are. I think that just kind of describes you as a person, because you just mentioned here all the things that, from reading, from being an action taker to having persistence, all of this kind of cultivates to who you are as a person, and to develop the kind of brand that you have already with the people that work with you and for you. It's just amazing what you've done over, just even a minimum of 5 years, even in the industry.
Yeah. I stole that from Tim Grover, his book, Relentless. And Tim Grover is the gentleman who trained Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, all of these high performing athletes. And, he just came out with his newest book, Winning, which I very much recommend to a lot of people. Very controversial, but I like to read books that are contrarian and not necessarily going along with the crowd all the time. And so, you have to be who you are if you want to get what you really want. And I mean, at the end of the day, if you're not acting as if, is what I try to call it for myself. If you're not acting as if, then you're faking. And if you're faking, then you're always trying to figure out what you told somebody. And if you're always trying to figure out what you told somebody, then you've got this, house of cards that you're standing on, and the wind can just blow it right over. But if you're self-assured enough to know who you are, and then that is, what you present to everybody that you talk to, then at the end of the day, you are being truly authentic and honest. And when you are dealing with the types of investments that we are, and the amount of investments that we are, if you are not who you are all of the time, people are going to see that, they're going to feel that, and they're going to call you out on it. And it's not a fun place to be at. So I love that quote. I'm glad that you pulled that one out.
Yeah. I'm very familiar with Tim Grover. I do like him. And that's one of the reasons why I pulled out that quote, is because of the fact that, I can resonate with that. And, you have many more quotes in your bio, but that was one that I wanted to call out. So,
absolutely. That's a great one.
Yeah, exactly. So, if you could step into my shoes, what other questions would you ask yourself that I haven't already?
I would say something around the lines of stress and anxiety management. I think that the last 2 years now, I guess is pretty close to being 2 years, or 18 months has been tough on a lot of people. A lot of things have happened in a lot of different scenarios that have changed people's lives, either for the better or for the worse. And at the end of the day, change is the only constant. And so if you can internalize that the world is going to change all of the time, then you can start to accept that as truth. And if that's the truth, then you don't allow that to affect you negatively. This business, you're going to have a lot of stress. Stress is breaking down to two types of stress. You have negative stress and you have eustress, or positive stress. And your body does not know the difference between either of those. And so you have to be able to manage the good and the bad the same way, and be able to stay very consistent. It's like my old O-line coach in college say, hey, you've got to stay right here, straight line all the time, because I need you on the next play. Now, wide receiver, if it's a run play to the left and he's a wide receiver on the right, you probably take that play off, just kind of run a little bit. If you're a center, you got to snap the ball. You got to block, you got to call out the Mike linebacker. You got to do all these different things to get everybody working in the right direction. And so I've tried to implement this in a way that allows me to manage kind of stress all the time. If you ask my wife, who's sitting in the other room over here, I think she would probably, say you could probably do a better job of this. But at the end of the day, if you want to say sustainable, that's the word that continues to come up in my mind, is what is sustainable? Not what can you do for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, but what can you do for 30 years? And how can you make sure your health, your wealth, your happiness, your joy, your mental, emotional, spiritual, physical life is all working in agreement. And when you can get that kind of momentum going personally, that's when you can start to create repeatable success and not just short-lived success. And that's what I'm after on a regular basis. And so the one thing I would say to you is I think that a lot of folks that get into a transition period of their time, it's a very stressful period. Understand that change is the only constant. Figure out ways to manage that. I love to use Tony Robbins' mental model of the triad. It's either what you're focused on, your physiology, or your language that you're using. And one of those three things, it's a triangle, right? One of those three things can typically get you into a different mental, emotional state. And that's what we're all about, is being in that flow state and being positive and having that good energy working on your behalf. Because if not, my little watch here will tell me my body battery, my stress levels on a regular basis. And I'm trying to keep those as low as possible so I can stay sustainable and make really strong and good decisions all of the time.
Yeah. Sustainable. That's a very good word. It's what you can sustain over the long period, over the long haul. It's not so much, being persistent and, just grinding every day. It's what you can sustain. I like that. I really like that.
That's right.
You mentioned a couple of individuals there, the Tony Robbins of the world, Michael Blanc's. You and I seem to follow the same, kind of circle of influence, if you will. Been following Tony Robbins since I was 15. That was one of the first books that I had actually read instead of these comic books that, or baseball card collections. Very first book I ended up getting was a Tony Robbins, Awaken the Giant from Within.
One of my favorites, man. It's a big old thick book, but that book changed my life.
Oh, that's amazing. What an influence. And, I can just really see how maybe something like a Tony Robbins has changed your life, because I could see, like the things that he's actually implement or says in his book, you've actually implemented as we're talking, through your background here. So it's just
Absolutely
amazing to see other people like that. I have to ask you this. What time do you start your day in the morning? And do you implement like the Miracle Morning or the Tony Robbins, his meditation? What do you do in the morning? What time do you wake up?
It's a great question. One that I've spent a lot of time on and get a lot of questions about. And one that I'm very opinionated on. And my opinion has changed over time. I used to be very structured in this, obviously the Miracle Morning being silence, affirmation, visualization, exercise, reading, and scribing. Those are the savers. I used to try to do those all in the same kind of order. And then I figured out some days I need different things in the morning. But here's what stays constant for me. Every single morning starts right around 4 a.m., sometimes 3:30, but typically 4 a.m., except for Sundays. And I wake up and, my faith is my number one focus in my life. And so I spend time reading the scripture and praying for about 30 minutes of every single day. And then I kind of get into what, I call my, my next kind of exercise, which is building energy. And for me, it's breathing. You'd be surprised on this podcast right here. I've talked a lot. I've lost my breath 3 or 4 times. Guess what? My heart rate's above 95 and 100. And so that's okay. But in the mornings, my heart rate is, between 50 and 55. And I want to keep it right there for a good amount of time. I'm talking probably 30, 45, 60 minutes at the beginning of my day. So I've started to do Wim Hof's breathing method. And he has a great app that I use that guides me through that every single morning. And so I do that for a good 20 to 25 minutes. And then next is getting into some reading or a course that I'm going through. And so I'm either reading a book from, on the economic side of things, Ray Dalio, Howard Marks, those types of guys, Sam Zell, reading something in real estate, and then also reading something that is bringing me joy. So right now I'm really obsessed with playing golf and getting better at golf. And so I'm reading some books around golf and what I love about that game is it's so mental. And I can use that game to create a stronger mental perspective on life as well. And it's all about controlling a lot of different things. And so I like that piece of it. So I'll read for another 30 minutes. And then I'm usually going through my journal. So I have a journal that I use. It's called the Intentional Day, where I've got my 10 habits for the week. I look at my goals, I read my affirmation, and then I go through my habits that I'm focused on every single day. I check mark how I did the day before. I write down wins, losses, and learnings, and then I go over that on a weekly basis as well. And then by that time, it's usually about 6 o'clock, and my 1-year-old son is getting up. My wife's bringing him down. And I'm hanging out with them for a little bit. And then my daughter gets up about 6:30 or 7. And then, the day just goes, very fast after that. But that's kind of my morning routine. And I kind of have my own savers methodology, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's wow. Yeah, you definitely have 30 to 45 minutes up on me. Yeah. So 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm up by about 4:30. But yeah, very well. There's different ways. I mean, people either follow the Miracle Morning by the book, but then other people have their own ways of implementing, their own structure. And I think it's great as long as you have something that you do every morning, right? That kind of builds your energy, gets your mind thinking. Being able to look at what you've done, you're able to measure basically what you did the day before, and you're actually planning your day in the morning as well. And then just
That's right.
Up to date on the current news. And that's why I was very intrigued the way that you approach your morning, because there are some aspects in there that I'm actually doing myself. So there are some similarities there. I probably will have to check out Wim Hof. I haven't heard about him yet. So.
Yeah. WIM, Wim Hof, Hof, Wim Hof breathing method. And I think there's YouTube videos, things like that. I love the app. I just use that app. It guides me through it. It's phenomenal. It has brought me a lot of energy in the mornings.
That's great. Okay, I'll definitely check him out. So just a couple more questions here. So where can our listeners actually connect with you if they want to learn more about you?
Well, I appreciate that. I'm highly active on LinkedIn, and you can search Logan Freeman, Mr. Kansas City, and I'll pop up there. But our website is ftwinvestmentsllc.com. But LinkedIn is where I'm most actively engaged with folks on a regular basis. And that website that I just mentioned has a lot of great free resources for folks as well. Thank you for that.
Oh, of course. You're very welcome. And my last question here, and it's kind of our signature question here on the Breakthrough Investor, is I always want to end with some type of action. So
Sure.
With that, what kind of actionable advice that you've learned that has been the most influential for you that you think that you can pass on to somebody that's listening to this to maybe even start, pushing their foot forward into maybe real estate or some avenue? What kind of action can you provide to them?
You have to create new standards for yourself. And what I mean by this, this is straight out of Tony Robbins' book, Awaken the Giant Within. You get out of life what you expect and what you allow other people to how you allow them to treat you. And so I took that internally as well and said, okay, well, I need to raise my circle of influence around me. So who are the 5 people that I'm spending the most time with, but also internally, what standards do I have for myself? What rules do I have for myself? Meaning, if I have to have such a high barrier to feel joy on a regular basis, you're never going to feel that way. But if you recreate and reframe the rule for joy in your life, then you can start to feel that on a regular basis. Here's a great example. Hey, I've got a big goal of $100 million of real estate this year. It's a huge goal for me. But I'm not going to allow myself to not feel the joy that I'll feel when I hit that goal today. Why would I rob myself for that? So I have a standard. I have a rule for myself that says, look, you can feel that with the ability, knowing that the system that you're implementing is taking you towards that. You can feel the same joy that you would feel when you hit that goal right now, here, today. And I think that's the biggest thing that a lot of folks need to understand and to be able to stay sustainable on a long-term basis is you cannot rob yourself of certain feelings. You cannot act as, when I achieve this, when I lose the weight, when I meet that person, I'm going to feel this. You have to find ways to create those feelings daily. And that's how you're going to compound and create momentum for yourself. That's how you're going to get the law of the compound effect working in your behalf. That's what I would say, Ernest.
Oh, that's great. That's a nice way to sum up basically what next steps that somebody should take. And I had taken a few notes here myself. I just want to say, Logan, that just listening through, what you've discussed so far, things that you've actually outlined, I think that you had definitely come a long way, in 5 years, what most people would probably achieve in 10 years, to say the least. But, from my understanding, you're definitely an individual that is thirsty for knowledge, an individual that just no hands down, just willing to do anything and everything you need to do in order to succeed in this business. And I think that's just a given in life, in professionally. But I think that there's just a certain ounce of oomph that you've got that I think that it just transcends. And I can feel it, you mentioned that your heart rate is racing, as you're talking to me. I actually am feeling pumped while you're talking because just your motivation itself kind of gets me
absolutely
anxious as well. And I think that's just things that based off of, your reading, Tony Robbins actually is the same way, those individuals that we follow have that similar kind of demeanor about them.
Yes.
So I think, those are just characteristics that I noticed right off the bat about you. And that's why I really wanted to get you on today as a person to talk about your background and to actually be that person of influence for other people that may want to look at real estate coming from an athletic background, not just athletically, but maybe other areas like, corporations, Fortune 500 businesses as well, or coming out of college, to say the least.
Absolutely.
And so I really want to thank you, for your time, Logan. You're a very busy individual. I just want to say congratulations on, in that 100 million that you guys are, have you guys achieved that, or is that a goal that you guys are hitting towards this year?
We're at 68.2 right now. So it's going to be a big push to the end of the year, but I'm very confident on it.
That's amazing. Well, I have no doubt that you guys are going to hit it. I just want to give a big, congrats to you and your team for doing very well. And I wish you nothing but success for you and your business here in the near future as well.
Well, I thank you for all of that. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I want to acknowledge you for the work that you're doing and bringing this message to the masses. It is top notch. And I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story here today.
You're very welcome. And likewise, thank you so much, Logan. And there you have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Until the next time, take care. Thanks for listening to the Breakthrough Investor in Commercial Real Estate podcast. If you like what you heard and you found value in this episode, we would really appreciate if you would give us a rating and a review. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. For those of you that are interested in investing passively in these types of deals in solid cash flowing commercial real estate throughout Arizona and Texas, as well as Idaho and Colorado, then visit us at mvpequitygroup.com. Fill out the investor interest form. That's mvpequitygroup.com. If you close on a multifamily deal or any other type of commercial property in the past 12 months and you want to be on this podcast, then send us an email on our Contact Us page for details. Thanks.